Have you been wondering how to build a successful strategy with open source for your company? Or why would you invest in open source projects when you can use the code for free? Are you an open source maintainer on the edge of burnout? Or a newcomer who's too intimidated to take the first steps and get involved? Maybe you're not a code developer and you think that there's no place for you in the open source ecosystem. You're not alone. My name is Ildiko Vancha, and this is the My Open Source Experience podcast, where my guests and I share our open source journeys with all the successes, the struggles, and joyful moments. Find the answers to your questions and dilemmas, and more importantly, join us and be part of the community. Hello, everyone, and welcome on the My Open Source Experience podcast. I am super excited yet again, but for very good reason, because we have Shuah Khan with us today. And maybe a little bit unusually, we will talk about all things in life because we are touching on a very important topic, which is inclusion and inclusivity in open source communities and women in tech. And I don't think we can talk about this topic without exploring all the things that lead up to the sometimes not so great statistics that people can see out there. Before we dive into this topic, Shua, can you please introduce yourself and tell a little bit about yourself to the audience? Like, what is your tech background and what do you do currently?
First of all, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here talking about the things that I'm passionate about. My name is Shua. I have been in open source for 18 years now, and before that, 17 years in closed source. I am an engineer by training. I have electronics and communications background in my bachelor's, and then I fell in love with computer science because it seemed to combine my logical and creative side. So I decided to pursue master's in computer science and never looked back.
And what is that you do right now? Like, what keeps you busy in the day job?
My day job is I maintain subsystems in the kernel, and also I am mentoring currently about 100 new developers, introducing them to the open source, introducing them to the kernel development, and helping them guide them through their first patches and help them acting a guide between the community and them in some ways, interpreting what maintainers say to them or developers say to them when they send their patches and so on. So this is a very fulfilling job to be able to guide new developers navigating the open source communities and open source development and so on.
So it sounds like that this mentorship program helps newcomers to overcome all those fears and insecurities and obstacles that they see when they first get involved in open source and open source communities, like especially if they never contributed elsewhere before.
Absolutely. And there is so much to learn when you get into a new community. Each community is different. Each open source community has its own dynamic and own language, if you will. It's almost like learning how the community works and how they interact with each other, and also how to send patches or send contributions in some ways, because every community likes to see the contributions come in differently. So it's all like navigating something very new um, people, new processes, and technology. On top of that, you're sending out your code that will be looked at and reviewed by thousands of people. And there is that fear to overcome when you are going out there being vulnerable and saying, hey, here is the work I have done, give me feedback. So all of that is a very difficult process for a new developer.
if you look at statistics, I only briefly looked up some numbers in terms of just like looking into, as an example, women in tech. Two women chatting on this podcast, it seemed like an appropriate statistic to look up, and I think most of the numbers that I saw were more around United States, but I think it was around 20 to 25% college students are women who are in computer science and engineering. And then in the workforce, I think the numbers are actually around somewhere between 26 and 35%. However, I also read that by the middle-ish of their careers, more women leave the field and the industry than men. So even if women get into tech, it seems like that it's more likely that they either leave or they get laid off and then decide to pick another field. And I think the open source numbers are unfortunately even lower than this. Like you mentioned, the mentorship program that you're leading and working with. Do you know what roughly the statistics are there in terms of women versus men? Like what the ratio is?
It's in line with the rest of the statistics we would hear, about 10%. And of the women, of men, all the new developers tend to be women. And it is kind of in line with the rest of the stuff. In the kernel too, we see contributions hover like anywhere between 7 to 10%. And that is a good question, which puzzles me at times because you can, the barrier part, right? So nobody really knows you are sending a contribution other than your legal name and email address. Really, nobody is asking questions. If in the corporate world they are making choices, hiring choices, but in the open source they are not making any hiring choices, right? So you are a self-selected group of people that would come and make contributions, send patches out, and do work. So that puzzles me, that why in that case we don't see more women, because open source lends itself to have flexible time, and you can work when you have time. Then I am puzzled, but it is 10%. The facts are that it is about 10%. And then interestingly, that 10% is exactly the same when I went to get my engineering degree. We were about 10%. I'm part of the 10% of women that were pursuing engineering at that time. That number seemed to have gone up to 40%, depending on the school you see. Each school might have different percentages of women. And yet, I was just looking up some numbers. In India, it seems like 40% of the graduates, engineering graduates, are women. However, you look at people that are working in the workforce, that is about 15 to 20%. So it seem to not continue. And so I do not understand all of the factors.
I think, funnily enough, we were around 10% in Hungary as well. In the, I think it was electrical engineering and computer science combined in that department. And I think we might have had, I don't know, one or two classes together, but like the ratio was, I think, around 10%. And obviously, electrical engineering had even less women than the computer science part did. So I very clearly remember that sitting next to another woman in class, especially when everyone was together, it was, I don't know, 200, 300 people in the computer science part. That was like, oh wow, you exist, another woman. So it was, yeah, it was something that you had to look for, like, where are the other girls? And like, women's bathrooms, I'm sure everyone saw lines at concerts and other crowded places at the women's bathrooms, and in my university was empty almost all the time. Like whenever I ran into one other woman, they're like, "Oh, hi." As an exception on the podcast, because we always talk about professional career, corporate environments, and open source, I would like to touch a little bit on your background, including childhood, because in my personal experience, the environment where someone grows up, that already contributes a lot into what decisions a person makes. And that also includes, career decisions based on how someone grows up and in what environment. I think it actually influences which way the person will go. And I think for women, it's not trivial in family life that you will get that support and encouragement from parents and the extended family to go into tech. I want to understand a little bit about your childhood from this perspective, because you obviously have an extensive career in tech and open source. In your childhood, were your parents role models in this? Were they encouraging and inspiring you, for example, to look for a career in, let's say, a non-traditional field for women?
You touched on a really good point there. I think we are, I think nature, they say nature, nurture. I think the home environment plays a huge part, I think, in who we are and how we are shaped. I would say that my environment at home, both my parents, they didn't see, I think my mom for sure thought that women should be, they shouldn't be constrained. Nobody should be constrained because of their gender, right? So I'm going to answer the question. Tech necessarily, I don't know if the tech was in their horizon at all. It was a long time ago. Computers were not popular or not even around at the time when they were growing up, of course. And then their idea was, their idea is I remember my dad, I was very young, probably 5, 6 years old. He talked about how he would want me to be a Indian Administrative Services officer, meaning that's a very high rank. This is an administrative government position. So multiple people write entrance exam, few are selected, and they go on to become leading an administrative role at the district level or state level. So he told me that, hey, when you become an IAS officer, I would come live with you and I would be outside. He's funny. He goes, I would stand outside balcony of your house and smoke a cigar. Well, that was his vision for me. So that something I think about it and I go, that's what you thought you would want me to do at age when I was age 5. So then I thought, so that set the tone that he did not see me following a traditional gender path, right? So that was his vision. So that kind of stayed with me and go, yeah, I can be who I want. Well, I didn't become an IAS officer. I went on to do math and engineering and career. I did have full support for that. And so environment does make a difference. And extended family, I did have a lot of women that had careers. They were professors, they were lecturers, they were doctors in the extended family. So I grew up seeing all of them navigating lives, raising children, and having a successful career, just doing what they were passionate about doing. So to me it was never something that, hey, that gender roles were, it never occurred to me I could do it. And so that is, I would say that how I would describe my family background.
I love that you mentioned that you saw other women in your extended family to also not make sacrifices. My aunt, I think she's actually a co-founder of a security software security company, and they created that company, I don't know, decades ago, so it's not like it happened yesterday. So she herself went into tech and raised kids at the same time, and all those things. So I did see these examples in the extended family as well. I think my grandmother was a chemist. So there were a lot of examples that women pursued careers, and it was totally okay. Like we didn't even, it was not part of a conversation why they pursued a career. It sounds like that even at 5 years old, your dad was kind of telling you that you should strive for something high, and it doesn't matter what gender you are and where you're from. You should not settle with a traditional model, and you should be somebody who's leading a whole department and is doing something important. So kind of giving this idea to you that you can do it and you will do it. And I'm not sure it really mattered what you're actually doing.
But no, I mean,
It sounds like that he gave you this inspiration of doing something important.
I think he planted a seed, I would say, in my head that I can be whoever I want.
You grew up in India. Was the environment at the time when you grew up more traditional in terms of the role of a man and role of a woman within families?
Yes, I mean, my mother stayed home. She was a homemaker. She raised children and she had her aspirations to do something, but she couldn't really. But yes, I mean, when you say traditional, yes, larger society, that's what it is. It's interesting because I have seen both. My own mother uh, just stayed home and she didn't have a job outside home, right? At the same time, I also saw people working outside their homes. And I grew up in villages a lot, partly because my dad worked for the government and he went from place to place, going from one village to another village. And I have actually seen women work in the fields. So, yes, that is another traditional role women do. You don't think about that, but they're out there working. They're working in knee deep water planting, right? So, if you look at that as a work, right, if you don't put labels saying it has to be blue collar or white collar or what collar, but they are working. They are working, they are making money, they are independent, they are bringing home the money to raise their children. So you can, if you look around, I think you do find examples of women that work outside home. You just have to look, in my opinion.
I have a similar and different experience in different ways. In our family, like my mom and dad, they had a company that they were managing together. And obviously, they had me. And so my mom was, before they started all this, she was a math and physics teacher at a high school. And then she married my dad, and then they had me, and they started their company. So she was obviously not able to really teach anymore because she was doing some accounting and this and that. So she was doing work in the company, almost like as you were talking about the women who were working out on the field. So she was doing both, the accounting stuff, which was still mathematics, and she was also doing some of the physical work in the workshop, and whatever needed to get done for the company to keep running. So I did see that model of that the woman can work and care for a family at the same time. However, they also kind of had this sort of traditional model of my mom was doing everything in the household. And it was so funny. I think there was one time my mom was in the hospital and I was at home with my dad, and I think he put orange juice into my tea as opposed to lemon juice. And then we laughed at it with my mother for years after that.
That's funny.
In that regard of homemaking, my mom did play the traditional role of cooking, doing laundry, cleaning, making sure that the house is all clean and tidy. Well, tidy enough. We lived on a farm, like you can only keep a farm so tidy at all times. But that was all her doing on top of everything else that her work was in the company. So I wouldn't say that she always had a nicely balanced work life ratio, but at least I never felt that a woman cannot do work outside of building the family. I did see kind of both sides as what you were saying too with your family. As you're looking back, do you think that seeing all these examples and getting these somewhat maybe hidden incentives from like your dad, how much do you think it fed into how you shaped your career and your life choices later on as a woman?
So, what I learned from my family and generally my parents, my family is probably, one would say, non-traditional family in the sense of speaking. I grew up in a large family. I mean, meaning I didn't grow up in a joint family, but summers we got together. So when in the house full of 32 people total, about 16 kids and 16 adults, there was no really, they didn't stop us from talking to an adult. I could just go question adults if very engaged. If I did not understand something, I could just say, "Hey, that doesn't make sense to me. Tell me." So nobody really stopped me saying you shouldn't be asking questions like that. So they, I think, encouraged that kind of curiosity in being not being afraid of asking questions, and so that shaped me a lot. Looking back, I kind of go looking back and where does this come from. I grew up in an environment where I could just go ask my grandfather, "Hey, how does this work?" or what do you know about this? And he would tell me, and then he would give me books to read or share whatever he knows. So all of that curiosity was encouraged. I mean, I could just ask questions. So how does it? And then on top of that, I grew up in environments where there wasn't as much a gender separation, and we would all hang out in the same place, and we would we were never told you can't play with this person or you can't play with. Surprisingly, I find that here in the U.S. There is so much separation. It's not. It's I don't know if it's a and it's enforced or self selected, but there is separation in how schools even gender comes into play. However, I never had that. I just didn't. And I left home about 14 or so to pursue my higher education because my dad grew up, my family was in villages because he had to be in villages. So, and then I left, I mean, I came here when I was in early 20s. So I just left and then said, "Hey, I'm going to go pursue." And then they are like, "Okay, that's fine." I think they were very afraid, but they didn't want to stop me. So I think it does shape. And then when I um, this extends to, so for women, right, we do, I mean, women do other things. I mean, meaning bearing children, have needing to being a caretaker, caregiver for family, and all of that. I think I made a choice when it came to that, picking a partner that could support me. So I looked for a partner that would support me in my career goals.
When I decided that I will go into tech of all things, my mother did try her best to talk me out of it. She just thought that I was interested in graphical design, so I should just go and pursue that field. for some reason, to her, that seemed more straightforward than going into tech. And even after I found my feet in tech and started to get somewhat successful in all the things, she still tried to talk me out of it. I mean, I had a computer science degree, and she still thought that I shouldn't be in tech. Whenever I got stressed out about something, she just tried to talk me out of tech. And I'm like, Mom, there's always stress in life. It's a very interesting context in terms of I've never been told that I can't do what I'm doing, but I was sort of incentivized that I shouldn't, because it's hard, because it's this, because it's that, because I get hurt. And it's just, I think that some of it attributes to the fact that I was born a girl as opposed to a boy. I don't think that my mom would be this fearful and cautious if I was a man. Obviously, I won't be able to prove it, but just based on the past, well, quite a few years now, I think that the fact that I am an only child and a woman, that's just amplifies all those fears that they had. So it's an interesting contrast of, she showed me that you can do whatever you want and you set your mind to, but then in her communication, she was actually communicating something very different. When you told your parents that you're taking off and you're pursuing your interest, like, did they try to talk you out of it at all, or they looked like they accepted it? Like, did they share any of the fears that they probably had with you at the time?
They didn't. I mean, really, later on, several years later, my mom tells me that how worried they both were, and how would she go just all by herself into a whole new country, and what would she do? How would she? But they just kept any of the fears that they had to themselves, and also my parents trusted me. They knew that I could do things. And maybe they had more trust in me than I had in myself in some ways.
Did you have anyone in your family who tried to talk you out of your choice and trying to, I don't know, either tell you that it's not a good choice because it might be something that harms you, or just that it's not let's say, quote unquote, traditional path for a woman?
So that's interesting observation you made. It's subtle messages sometimes, right? So when my grandfather was celebrated every single win, he would tell everybody, "Oh, my granddaughter got, I don't know, whatever grade in math and all of those things." But when I told him that I am going to engineering, he said, "Oh, no, you should go pursue literature. Um, Telugu is my native language, so Telugu literature, and and then become a professor or a teacher." So that's what he told me. And that that came as a, I would say, somewhat of a almost bordering on shock to me, because I never really thought that he would be one of those that would discourage me. And there was another conversation I have had. My uncle, he was talking to me. This was after I joined engineering. So then he was talking to somebody and he goes, "Oh, for women, teaching is a good role for women." And I was in the car, and there were a few other of my cousins there, girls. And then it felt like he was putting me on the spot. But those are the two things I can remember. But on the other hand, though, my grandfather, when I was coming to US, he didn't say awesome, but he helped me with the funds. He had some kind of fund set aside for me, and I was asking him, "Hey, can I get that now because I need it?" And he was very supportive in providing those funds to me, which helped me with my pursuing my degree here.
Did it ever affect you what he said? Other than, you mentioned that it was a surprise to you that he of all people tried to discourage you, how did it affect you at the time?
So I was very surprised because I looked up to him, and then he was my source for all sorts of learning. Right? He would just he felt like he knew everything. So and then it did surprise me, but I mean, it didn't discourage me negatively, but I thought I was angry at first. I think I was thinking it's frustrated me a little bit because I mean, this is it's an achievement, and then how come you're not supporting me? You're telling me that I shouldn't be doing this. But I thought about it some more, and then I thought maybe it is a limitation on what he could imagine my life would be like. So, and I didn't give it much thought after that. I mean, I respect him, I love him, but I loved him. But I would say that lack of support, I didn't take that as that didn't discourage me from pursuing, I would say. And it is kind of in my nature. Sometimes when somebody tells me you can't do this, I I tend to say, I will show you I can do it. So, I mean, it has happened to a few times in my life. So, I guess if he said, hey, you can't do this, and I'm like, no, I'll go show you that I can do it. So,
And so
I
much
guess
more. Yeah.
that's it, right? So, it actually fuels my gratitude.
I know. I mean, I'm similar in that regard. Like, oh, it can't be done. Really? Let's see. And then I will not, I will not rest until it's done. I love that you said that you recognize that the limitation that your grandfather was talking about is not your limitation, but rather his. Because I think that is a very important distinction that is very hard to it is very hard to make, because just thinking back on my experience, and not just early childhood but high school and going to college, I do remember this feeling of anger, and sometimes I still switch over to fight mode, just because in the environment where I grew up, because I was not the firstborn son, I was the firstborn girl. So my dad never take me out to the workshop to fix up any of the big machineries, even though I would have loved to. And he was not treating me as a kid. He was treating me as a girl. And so in the back of my mind, I just felt, like how I was not good enough, or I wasn't as good as if I was a boy. And it's not something that I was told. How I handled certain situations, I think I sometimes had this fight mode in me, that if there were men in the room, I had to be better than every single one of them. Whenever someone gets the realization that the limitation that they were told, it's not theirs, but the person's who's telling them, I think that is life changing, because I needed quite some time to digest everything from my childhood, and how it affected me, and how it affected my behavior, and how I treat and work and collaborate with others. And I think that just knowing this realization is there, I think it's very important.
And I wonder if that is what is the subtle messaging and subtle messages about the gender roles is what we see in the industry. I don't know. That's why I said I don't know when you asked about the statistics and numbers.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many of these nuances that is just hard to recognize. And I think very often, obviously, we're trying to improve inclusivity and all the things, but if young girls who actually do want a tech career end up not choosing it when they go to school, then whatever we try to do in the environment, the professional work environments and in corporate and open source environments, where people are there after, they have their college degree for the most part, then it's too late for many. Do you remember like your first job and when you started to work in tech as you came out of college or university? Do you remember the experience? Was it all mostly guys? Did you experience any challenges as you were starting your career as a woman?
No, actually, I think my first job I had, my managers were women. That company had quite a few women in the both in the development side as well as the management side. So it's interestingly, I ended up starting work in a place where I had good role models in that sense. So after that, the other place I worked at would be Bell Labs in and Lucent and all of those. Over there too, we have had a lot of women managers as well as developers. I do not know whether it came from the AT&T Bell Labs type of culture, 60s and 70s. There were a lot more women in tech. Well, I think that there were a lot more women in those early days in tech than now in the core development roles. So I have had several women there, but not so much after that. When I joined Hewlett Packard, I haven't seen very many women, especially if you go down to the doing low-level software like firmware and operating system and those kinds of things. You don't see very many women in that space. And also, I do think that when there is a little bit of a push to transition to management roles, I think both men and women are pushed to go there because the career ladder, right? You'll have a technical. We didn't have the concept of at some point at back then, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago, there was no concept of technical upward mobility if you want to pursue strictly technical path. After a while of being a software engineer, you if you want to go up the ranks, you pretty much had to kind of switch to management. So if you didn't want to, you stayed with the technical. So I think that people had to choose whether they want to pursue management careers, even if they did not like it, right? So there is a little more push on women to do that because again, women are looked at as having a soft skills, I think. I don't know if I'm generalizing, but there I perceived some kind of push to say, hey, do you want to become a manager? And I didn't want to. I have people skills. I work with people well, and I love working with people. But I don't want to be in the position of deciding people's salaries and people's whether they keep the job or not. That's not me. So I knew what I wouldn't be able to handle. So I resisted the pressure to that, and thankfully, soon enough, I think the place I was working at, they introduced a technical career path that where you can advance. But I did have role models, both men and women. And in general, I have found that people are supportive. Um, and you find mentors wherever you go. You learn from them and you teach them if you have that kind of relationship. I think you have to look for support. You have to build those networks. You have to build alliances and support system. So that's very crucial for your personal or professional life both.
At the beginning, it sounds like that you had more women in the working environment, and then as you transitioned over to HPE, and then closer and closer to the operating system level, you had more men in the work environment. Did it change your experience at the workplace? Were there any challenges that came because you were in an environment that was more male dominated, like in the operating system area? Did it affect your career and work experience at all?
It didn't. So I would say partly because um, I would just walk into a room with maybe 20 men. I would be the only woman on the team. But I never really looked at myself. I did not define myself as a woman engineer. I defined myself as an engineer who happens to be a woman. So that's a big distinction. I mean, you really, really, it's subtle, but it's big. Because when you walk into a room and say, I belong here, and with the rest of them. I might know something more than others know, and they have something to teach me, whether they are men or women, right? So if you go with that attitude, I think it does help. And I personally wasn't intimidated by that. Did I face any discrimination? I wouldn't know because initially I think they will look at you like, okay, um, you know, does she belong here? And there are some people that will say, what is she doing here, right? But but I think that the way I handled it is like, well, I am here. I have a seat at the table. I'm gonna be here. But not everybody will treat you like an equal. I mean, they will have their own limitations will come into play on how they interact. But I have never really um, been told we can't give you this project because you are a woman. I have never been told. I found very supportive environments wherever I went.
If you were to create a new open source project tomorrow and set out to build a community around it, based on your experience in open source communities and just as well in your tech career, like what things would you put in place in that new open source project to make sure that it is inclusive to anyone and everyone who would like to participate? What are the things that you think would be crucial to put in place at the beginning?
So I would say there'll be multiple things. One is having information, very clear information on participation, how to participate in the project, and information about that project, and how to somebody new when they are looking at it, how can they learn enough to be able to contribute to the project. Those three things for sure, those are important. I think that does help. Now we do have documentation and so on, but you have to do that in a way, be uh, cognizant of teaching the new people. Like, I mean, you're describing your project and you're saying this is the process of contribution, and then you would set that up. And the other thing is, now that we have learned, we have been, open source is 30 some years old now, and some of these code of conduct things have come in only in the last, I would say, 6 to 7 years. And you would do that on day one, for a new project. And think about inclusivity, because when open source started out, we didn't know where it was going. So we know now how global in nature it is. So you would think about inclusivity in more broader terms, and you would have that also built in. And those are the things I can think of, that leveraging the experience we have already have, collectively, for we have been doing this for 30 plus years now.
Before we depart, Shuah, can you tell us something about yourself that has nothing to do with tech, nothing to do with open source, some kind of a hobby or a fun fact that you don't mind sharing?
Yes, I am a hiker. I hike a lot recently. I have done Grand Canyon hike once, going down to the river and coming back up on Bright Angel Trail just in a day. And recently, after so many years, after almost 25, 26 years later, I have done another trail going down to I didn't go all the way down to the river. I fell short of like 100, 200 feet, but I came back up on my own feet. So that is something I do. So that yes. So I do backpacking trips and on and off. Not as much day hikes. I'm primarily do day hikes.
I mean, I think I never done the Grand Canyon myself, but I read that it's not exactly an easy hike. I mean, it's
No,
quite deep, isn't it?
not. Yeah, it's about, I mean, it is long. It took me, this one was like 7,500 feet down, I think, and 7,800 feet down, and then you have to come back up. It is a grueling thing.
Wow. I mean, for a day
So,
hike, that's quite the achievement.
oh
Wow. I
yeah,
mean, that's amazing.
8 in the
Wow.
morning to 7 in the evening, I think. So it's a long haul. But in addition to that, I also write. I'm a writer as well. So those are the two passions outside the work passion I have.
What is that you're writing? Like novels or books, any genre that you write?
I think the what it would be, if you have to describe it, it's going to be legacy, um, writing, literature, and draws upon all of my life, living in kind of two cultures, three cultures, and two continents, kind of thing. So I started out writing because I wanted to leave something for my children, that they know where I come from. That's how I started out a couple of years ago, and I seem to love writing, so I keep writing. So I have material worth for two books. So at the moment, so it seems like it's therapeutic to write.
Wow. Is any of it published anywhere or is it still meant for your kids?
It is published. I publish it on, if you go look shuahkhan.com, you will see all of the work that I have done in the last couple of years. And I publish as a short narratives or stories. And then I have a collection there. That's where you'll see it's published, meaning it's not in a book form, but it's in a online publication. I am working with a publisher now to see what we can do. I started working with a publisher for a couple of months now, so we probably will come up with something soon.
Amazing. Well, once that is available, then I will update the description below with the link on where the book is. Before then, I will just add the link to your website, and I'm excited to read all the stories that you have out there. And with that, that's all, folks. That was our episode for today. What did resonate with you the most? What new ideas, strategy, or useful tips did you hear today? Or you have a comment or follow-up question to ask? Comment on the episode below or start a conversation on your favorite social media platform. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the podcast so others can discover it too. And stay tuned because the next episode is just around the corner.